Elizabeth. Elizabeth.
O my brother, hearken to the delightsome words of my honeyed tongue, and quaff the stream of mystic holiness from my sugar-shedding lips. Sow the seeds of my divine wisdom in the pure soil of thy heart, and water them with the water of certitude, that the hyacinth of my knowledge and wisdom may spring up fresh and green in the sacred city of thy heart. Baha'u'llah.
Bibi.
Justice is, in this day, bewailing its plight, and equity groaneth beneath the yoke of the oppression. The thick clouds of tyranny have darkened in the face of the earth and envelop its peoples. Through the movement of our pen of glory, we have, at the bidding of the omnipotent ordainer, breathe a new life in every human frame and instill in every word a fresh potency. All created things proclaim the evidence of this worldwide regeneration. This is the most great, the most joyful tidings imparted by the pen of this wronged one to mankind. Wherefore, fear ye, O my well-beloved ones, who is it that can dismay you? A touch of moisture sufficeth to dissolve the hardened clay, out of which this perverse generation is molded. The mere act of your gathering together is enough to scatter the forces of these vain and worthless people. Baha'u'llah.
Matthew.
When you love a member of your family or a compatriot, let it be with the ray of the infinite love. Let it be in God and for God. Wherever you find the attributes of God, love that person, whether he be of your family or another. Shed the light of a boundless love on every human being whom you meet, whether of your country, your race, your political party, or of any other nation, color, or shade of political opinion. Heaven will support you while you work in this ingathering of the scattered peoples of the world beneath the shadow of the almighty tent of unity. Abdul Baha.
Deng Ting.
To discriminate against any race on the ground of its being socially backward, politically immature, and numerically in the minority. It's a flagrant violation of the spirit that animates the face of Baha'u'llah. The consciousness of any division or cleavage in its ranks is alien to its very purpose, principles, and ideals. Once its members have fully recognized the claim of its author, and by identifying themselves with its administrative order, accepted unreserved the principles and laws embodied in its teachings, every differentiation of class, creed, or colors must automatically be obliterated and never be allowed, under any pretext, and however great the pressure of events or of public opinion to reassert itself. Shoghi Effendi.
Thank you to all the day's readers. Next, we're going to listen to a healing prayer. If any of you wish to remember a loved one through this prayer for healing, please feel free to call out their name at this time.
Daniel Byers,
Ready?
Ya Ilahi, اسمك الشفائي وذكرك دوائي وقربك رجائي وحبك مؤنسي رحمتك طبيبي ومعيني في الدنيا والآخرة وإنك أنت المعطي العليم الحكيم يا بهاء الآباء يا بهاء الآباء يا بهاء الآباء
And now we're blessed with a musical offering.
Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Acha moyo wako uwake kwa wema, kwa wale wote wanaweza kupita njia yako. Acha moyo wako uwake kwa wema, kwa wale wote wanaweza kupita njia yako. Here are all the ways of one sea. Here are all the leaves of one tree. Here are all the ways of one sea. amorosa bondad hacia todos los que se crucen en vuestro camino. 要让你的心为所有你遇到的人燃烧出炽热的爱火，要让你的心为所有你遇到的人燃烧出炽热的爱火。Hear all the waves of one sea. Gentilezza per tutti quelli che incontrate sul vostro cammino. Que votre cœur soit embrasé par une affectueuse bonté envers tout ce qui peut croiser votre chemin. Que votre cœur soit embrasé par une affectueuse bonté envers tous ceux qui peuvent croiser votre chemin. Hear all the waves of one sea. Hear all the leaves of one tree. Hear all the waves of one sea. Hear all the leaves of one tree. Leaves of one tree. Hear all the waves of one sea. Hear all the leaves of one tree. Hear all the waves of one sea. Hear all the leaves of one tree. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path. Que vuestro corazón se encienda. Let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path.
Friends, each week we're blessed to have a guest presenter share with us their insights on a particular topic. This week, we're honored to have with us Dr. Raj Khodadost. Dr. Khodadost joined us a few weeks back to talk about the life of Abdul Baha, and he has come back and he's going to share with us more. I believe this is part 2 of 3. He can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But we're all very happy to have him back and looking forward to another wonderful talk.
Good morning, and thank you for your invitation again. So I look forward to having another visit with you. We're going to continue talking about the most mighty branch, the mystery of God, the perfect exemplar, Abdul Baha. I'm sure that all of you, or most of you, have studied many of the writings of Abdul Baha, including some answered questions. And his talks in Europe and in the US. His talks in London, Paris talks, and then of course promulgation of universal peace in North America. But the book or the work that puts all of these things in context of the place and the time and the people involved, as I mentioned last time, is the wonderful 550-page book, Abdul Baha, The Center of the Covenant, by our beloved hand of the cause, Hassan Balyuzi. You probably know that Abdul visited some 12 or 13 states while he was in North America in 1912. But among these, particularly 5 or 6 states stand out where he spent more time. And then he visited many places, including universities, places of worship, places for intellectuals and people of philosophy, philosophers, and so on and so forth. So among those states that spend more time, of course, begins with New York and ends with New York, but he landed and he returned. Maine, north of Massachusetts, where he visited Greenacre. California, where he spent a good amount of time in San Francisco and then in Los Angeles, and then Washington, D.C. I thought that we really need one session for each one of these main states that he visited and what he accomplished and the people that he visited and so on and so forth. But today I'm going to share with you 2 or 3 episodes, and if you have time, go back to how some of those individuals or scholars or church ministers, their impression of their visit with Abdul Baha. If you have a little time, I'll spend some of those things with you as well. So I'll begin with a question, and that is that, at least according to Hassan Balyuzi, in North America, what area, what state? He was well received, of course, in all of these places, but Mr. Balyuzi says that in one area in particular, he was completely 100% well received by journalists and the people that came across him. Where do you think that place was? In North America. Well, it is in North America, but it's not in the US. It was in Montreal, in Canada. That according to this, to these writings, he was 100% well received by people of faith and particularly by journalists of all persuasions. And you probably know where he stayed, in Montreal. He stayed in the home of May Bowles, later on May Maxwell, and Mr. Maxwell, who later on became hand of the cause as well. He stayed in their home, and this was when Ruhi Khanum was born, and she was about 2 years old in 1912 when he visited them. Then in the course of 1 week or 10 days that he was in Montreal, he stayed in that home. And as you know, still until today, that is a shrine that if we Baha'is go there to Montreal, we want to go and visit that place. So I want to share with you a story or two from Montreal, and then how beautifully it was received by according to Ms. Baliuzi, about 100% of these journalists or whoever came to visit them and gave amazing tributes. And then for each one of these tributes and each one of the articles which was written, there were more and more people who were coming and thronging and staying in line to visit and have the blessing of meeting Abdul Baha. But before I do this, let me go back and let's review and read again the definition that Shoghi Effendi gives of who Abdul Baha was. I read part of it last time, but I'll read the whole paragraph this time. According to Shoghi Effendi, he is and should all time be regarded first and foremost as the center and pivot of Baha'u'llah's peerless and all-enfolding covenant. His most exalted handiwork, the stainless mirror of his light, the perfect exemplar of his teachings, the unerring interpreter of his word, the embodiment of every Baha'i ideal, the incarnation of every Baha'i virtue, the most mighty branch sprung from the ancient root, the limb of the law of God, the being round whom all names revolve, the mainspring of the oneness of humanity, the ensign of the most great peace, the moon of the central orb of this most mighty and most holy dispensation. Styles and titles that are implicit and find their truest, their highest and fairest expression in the magic name of Abdul Baha. And then Shoghi Effendi continues and say that he is, above and beyond these appellations, the mystery of God, an expression by which Baha'u'llah himself has chosen to designate him, and which, while it does not by any means justify us to assign to him the station of prophethood, indicates how, in the person of Abdul Baha, the incompatible characteristics of a human nature and superhuman knowledge and perfection have been blended and are completely harmonized. Who else but Shoghi Effendi could put it in one or two condensed paragraphs in completely portraying and explaining who Abdul Baha was? So in places that he went, many people had the blessing of understanding who Abdul Baha was and what he stood for. As I mentioned, among them, and particularly in the state of California, in the state of, in the city of Montreal in Canada, where he visited and stayed with Maxwell's. So let me share with you a couple of passages from what the tributes that was written about him in the newspapers who came and interviewed him. So one of them was in the Montreal Daily Star, and that's the issue of September 11, 1912. It says in that tribute, Abdul Baha has preached universal peace for 50 years. In a word, Abdul Baha is the great protagonist of peace in the world today. To bring about its accomplishment is the practical corollary of the two tenets which are the foundation of his creed: the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. For 40 years, he was persecuted for preaching it. For 20 years, imprisoned in Accra. Yet the universal peace for which he hopes and in which he believes has no resemblance to the fantastic chimera of slack-thinking sophists, with the easy assumption that all things are as they ought to be. For Abdu'l-Baha, with all his hatred of war and horror at its moral and material results, has no delusions as to the conditions in Europe or the trend of political events. It is futile to hope for any slackening of the present race of the nations to increase their armaments, he says. A great war in Europe, because this was 1912, and the First World War began in 1914. And Al-Baha says, they quote him, "A great war in Europe is a certainty before permanent peace can be established. International peace can only be reached by an international agreement entered into by all nations." And he goes on and on, giving tribute and giving examples of some of the passages from Abdu'l-Baha's talks, from Abdu'l-Baha's writings. And it's just, there's so many interviews and so many blessed. Let me just share one more passage from these interviews. Another one. He says, the Venerable Apostle of Peace emphatically declared that in the temper of the world today, it was futile to hope for any slackening of the present race of the nations to increase their armaments. He reiterated his absolute conviction that the Great War in Europe was a certainty before permanent peace would be established in the world. As to the question of disarmament, Abdu'l-Baha said that all nations must disarm at the same time. It will not do at all, and it is not proposed that some nations shall lay down their arms, while others, their neighbors, remain armed. The peace of the world must be brought about by international agreement. All nations must agree to disarm simultaneously. In the meantime, all people of goodwill must ever strive to make international peace the great issue. They must work unceasingly to turn public opinion in favor of this line of action. All Europe, he says again, is an armed camp. The very armaments themselves are productive to war. So there are many, many articles written about him and many interviews that journalists and others had with him in Montreal. So I wanted to share that tribute with you. Okay. So for the second episode, we go to California. It's also interesting as I read all these tributes to Abdu'l-Baha and all his talks again and passages from his talks, that although he had gave so many tributes in effect to North America and to the USA and to his long-term bright future, hopefully the inaugurator of global peace and all of that. But there was a very special place, based on what I read in these passages, for him from all of these states, for one state in particular. Maybe that's why all of our Persian friends went to California initially. So many of them, and so many of us are still there. But he loved California. He said that the people in California, for the most part, are so open-minded, are so receptive, and the future of the faith in particular, in California in particular, would be especially bright. So there was a special place for him with California. And you know that he spent a good amount of time in San Francisco before he went to Los Angeles. And he went to Los Angeles for one reason and one reason alone, and he did not really spend much time in Los Angeles for visits and talking here and there, as compared to other places where he went. He went for one reason and one reason alone. And that was to go and visit the grave of the first person who became Baha'i in this country in 1893. The first Baha'i, Thornton Chase, right? Thornton Chase was the first Baha'i, and he was still living when Al-Baha came to US, and Al-Baha was looked forward to going to California and visiting him. By the time Al-Baha reached California, Thornton Chase had passed away. So he made a point of going to Los Angeles for the main reason, for the main purpose of visiting the grave of Thornton Chase. So let's go to Los Angeles. And let me find the page and just read a passage with regard to his visit to the cemetery to visit the shrine of Thornton Chase. It will be a shrine. It is already a shrine for all of us of Baha'is who go that city, that Al-Baha took the time to go and spend his whole day in that shrine, and we must do the same. And that's what is recorded. The cemetery was located outside of the city of Los Angeles. Al-Baha took a tram car. He walked very quietly into the cemetery until he approached the grave of Thornton Chase. When he remarked on the beauty of the surroundings, then leaning against the tree, he stood silently before that resting place of the first Baha'i of the Christian West. He asked for some flowers, and with great care and loving attention, he arranged them on the grave. Then, still facing the grave, he turned in the direction of Akka. And listen to this. And chanted, Al-Baha chanted, the tablet of visitation, the tablet which is read in the shrines of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. That's the tablet that Al-Baha chose to chant at the site of the grave of Thornton Chase. Following that, he chanted a prayer for Thornton Chase and spoke of the services which that dedicated man had rendered to the faith. Al-Baha had named him Sabet, which means steadfast. He was the first steadfast Baha'i of this continent, of the USA. He called him a steadfast. At the conclusion of his visit, Al-Baha knelt on the ground and kissed the grave of Thornton Chase. And it goes on. So that was the amazing tribute of Al-Baha to Thornton Chase, the first American Baha'i. And the other episode that I want to share with you is one of his many visits to many places of worship and universities and so on and so forth in San Francisco. But as I said, he was very impressed by the people of California, starting with San Francisco. And from what Mr. Bayuzi says, at least according to this account, there was one place of worship. From all these churches and other places of worship that he had visited, that had the largest number of attendees, a huge audience that with very difficulty they could accommodate in that place of worship. What do you think that place of worship was? Unitarian, Universalist, Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalians, who? Which one of these? What do you think? Anybody remembers?
Unitarian.
If you remember, say it. It was
Synagogue.
synagogue. Thank you very much. You remember, it was the synagogue. Temple Emmanuel. Isn't that amazing? 2,000 people. The largest audience that Abba had was in that synagogue. And friends, from early on in the progress of the faith in Iran, one of the groups who also accepted the faith and became dedicated Baha'is were from the Jewish origin. One of them became Hand of the Cause. Anyone remembers his name? Musa, and Musa means Moses. His name was Moses. Musa Banani. He became one of the first group of Hand of the Cause that Shoghi Effendi appointed for Africa, and he pioneered beginning of the 10-year crusade to Africa. You know what place, what city? The Kampala, Uganda, where we also have our Hand of the Cause from Africa. What's his name? Remember Hand of the Cause from Africa? Olinga. Hand of the Cause from Olinga, who set the kind of Africa on fire. And at least his home was open to him as well, to Olinga, when he was searching the faith, and he became Baha'i. And I remember, as a side note, story of Olinga, of Musa Banani, whom Shoghi Effendi appointed Hand of the Cause. By the way, he had little education. He could not read and write Farsi or Arabic. He knew just a little Hebrew. And Al-Baha appointed him Hand of the Cause. And he cried and begged Shoghi Effendi, please appoint my son-in-law. I can't even read and write. I'm nobody, I'm nothing. Why do you appoint me? And Shoghi Effendi said, his time will come. It's now your turn. Anyway, we have those kind of Jews also who embraced the faith of Baha'u'llah, many of them. I knew many of them in Iran, those who had become Baha'is, and others, but particularly those who had embraced the faith. So anyway, Abdullah spoke in that synagogue. What do you think? What topic did he choose to speak in synagogue? What do you think the topic was? The main topic. Matthew, you remembered the place that we should have read it. What do you think that his topic was?
Was it Muhammad?
His topic was, he also mentioned Muhammad. His topic was oneness of religion, but particularly to prove the truth of Jesus Christ in the synagogue for 2,000 attendees. Only Abdullah could do it. But we are walking on his path. He's training us. He wants us to be trained to walk in his path, to speak his language, to learn his language, to speak how to have no enemy, to speak to the heart of people of all religions, of all persuasions, and no religion at all, and speak to their hearts. And tell them that they're all children of the same God. So with that, without further ado, let me find a few passages from his talk, from his long talk. I will just mention a few passages from his talk in that synagogue. This was one of his longest talks, by the way. He starts with these words. He says, the greatest bestowal of God in the world of humanity is religion. For assuredly the divine teaching of religion are above all other sorts of instruction and development to man. We will therefore investigate religion, seeking from an unprejudiced standpoint to discover whether it is a source of illumination, the cause of development, and the animating impulse of all human advancement. We will investigate independently, free from the restrictions of dogmas and dogmatic beliefs, blind imitations, and ancestral forms, and the influence of mere human opinion. For as we enter in this question, we will find some who declare that religion is a cause of uplift and betterment of the world, while others asserted that it is a detriment and source of degradation to mankind. We must give these questions thorough and impartial consideration so that no doubt or uncertainty may linger in our minds regarding them. How shall we determine whether religion has been the cause of human advancement or retrogression? So, and he talks about religion, and after discussing Abraham and the covenant that God made with him, Abba then turns to Moses, even though this is their religion. But Abba talks for about half an hour about the station of Jesus, Moses. And let me just read a couple of passages. So he says, Moses suddenly appeared among them, among the Israelites. Although he was but a shepherd, such majesty, grandeur, and efficiency became manifest in him through the power of religion, that his influence continues to this day. His prophethood was established throughout the land, and the law of his word became the foundation of the laws of all nations. This unique personage, single and alone, rescued the children of Israel from bondage through the power of religious training and discipline. He led them to the Holy Land and founded there a great civilization, which has become permanent and renowned and under which these people attained the highest degree of honor and glory. And he goes on. So he develops this theme, but religions, the foundational religions, Abraham and then Moses, and discusses them, and all that, of course, comes to Jesus Christ. So Mr. Baha'i says Abba had prepared the way for the central and challenging theme of his exposition, which he now unfolded to the congregation of Temple Emmanuel. And that's what he said. Christ ratified and proclaimed the foundation of the law of Moses. And he had talked about Jesus. But then he says that, then here he says, Muhammad and all the prophets have revoiced that same foundation of reality. Therefore, the purpose and accomplishments of divine messengers have been one and the same. They were the source of advancement to the body politic and the cause of the honor and divine civilization of humanity, the foundation of which is one and the same in every dispensation. It is evident then that the proofs of the validity and inspiration of a prophet of God are the deeds of beneficent accomplishment and greatness emanating from him. If he proves to be instrumental in the elevation and betterment of mankind, he is undoubtedly a valid and heavenly messenger. Of course, he's not talking about mainly about Jesus Christ. And he goes on and on for the largest part of his talk about proving the station of Jesus Christ and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and what was accomplished because of Jesus Christ, and how Jewish faith and the Bible became universal because of Jesus Christ. That's another amazing talk that if you have not read it, it's probably an hour and a half long talk, was an hour and a half long, that we should all study. Steve, I think based on my watch, I'll have 9 minutes. Is that correct?
Actually, you could keep talking even a little longer than that if you want.
Thank you so much. I don't want to tire people, but let me at least stick to the 9 minutes. And if you have a few more minutes, we'll leave it for discussion and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I just wanted to give you these few episodes about life of Abdul Baha in North America. But as I said, there's so much. And for these 5, 6 cities or 6 states that we spend most of his time, which is New York, Illinois, California, Washington, D.C., and Maine, we should spend. My suggestion is this is the centennial of the Ascension of Abdul Baha, and we should spend a session for each one of them. So with that, let's go and spend the remaining few minutes on tributes to Abdul Baha. From those who visited him, from those who had the bounty of reading his writings at the time. And let me start with Thornton Chase. And that's what he wrote early on. I mean, probably one of the earliest tributes that we have. He says, the fame of him has gone around the world. Many from this country, led by various motives, have visited him. And we have seen and heard them after the return. Without exception, they have agreed to declaring that they have seen the most powerful being upon the earth. They tell how going before him with varied expectations, curiosities, and hopes, and finding themselves in his presence, they were overwhelmed with awe, shame, fear, love, abasement, or exaltation, emotions differing according to the condition of each. They tell how they fell at his feet and longed to kiss even the dust on which he trod. Strong men with tears streaming down their cheeks and voices broken with emotion have told us of the unspeakable love, gentleness, majesty, and power radiating from that simple man of slender build and medium height. And he goes on. So that was his impression of Thornton Chase, the first Baha'i in North America. And then there are many tributes, and it's good to read some of them. And I mentioned something about Howard Kobe Ives, perhaps the first unity minister who became Baha'i. And perhaps it is with that hope that one of my best friends in this city, in the city of Marietta, is a unity minister. And he's very loving and very close to the faith. And for years, we have been spending 2-3 sessions a month, basically, reading Abdul Baha's writings for him. Baha'u'llah's writings, and then Abdul Baha's writing. And my next visit with him is tomorrow. So have him in our thoughts and minds. So Howard Kobe Ives, this is what he says about Abdul Baha. Again, he also has many passages, and he has a book about his visits with Abdul Baha. But I'll just share a passage. He says, here is how a man who outwardly, like myself, lived in the world of confusion, yet inwardly, beyond the possibility of doubt, lived and worked in that higher realm of the world. All his concepts, all his motives, all his actions derive from their springs from the word of light, and which is to me a most inspiring and encouraging fact. He took it for granted that you and I, the ordinary run-of-the-mill humanity, could enter into and live and move in that world if we would. Let me read this last sentence again. This is what Abdu'l-Baha was. But then according to Harkabi Ives, he says, it was the most inspiring and encouraging fact. But then he took it for granted, Al-Baha took it for granted, that you and I, the ordinary run-of-the-mill humanity, could enter into and live and move in that world if we would. We need to want it, we need to try, and we need to walk in his path, in that path. Okay, and for the next 2 minutes, I'll share two more tributes. Well, when he went back to Europe, he also visited France, England, and France again, and then Germany for a short while, and then he also went for a short stay in Budapest. Some of us bypassed that part. And in Budapest, he visited a fellow by the name of Vambery, according to this, the renowned Hungarian Orientalist. So he met him after he returned in 1913. And then later on, after this visit, a few years before he passed away, or shortly before he passed away, this is what he wrote. And he wrote a letter to Abdu'l-Baha, and this is what was in the content of his letter, this was what it was. He says, I forward this humble petition to the sanctified and holy presence of Abdu'l-Baha, who is the center of knowledge, famous throughout the world and loved by all mankind. O thou noble friend, who art conferring guidance upon humanity, may my life be a ransom to thee. I have seen the Father of your Excellency from afar. I have realized the self-sacrifice, noble courage of his son, and I'm lost in admiration. For the principles and aims of your Excellency, I express the utmost respect and devotion. And if God the Most High confers long life, I will be able to serve you under all conditions. I pray and supplicate this from the depth of my heart. What a beautiful, heartfelt letter of a man who was touched deeply by Abdu'l-Baha and basically confessed his faith to the Baha'i faith, and his declaration in that beautiful letter to Abdu'l-Baha. And so with that, I'd like to stop. I'd like the friends to share their thoughts.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share? Well, I'll kick things off. This is, I'd be curious, maybe perhaps I don't know if this event is recorded anywhere. It's a bit of family history that I happened to learn of because in Gainesville, Florida, where I became a Baha'i, there was a family. They were the Hankins, but it came from the mother's side. So that wasn't the family name originally. I'm afraid I've forgotten what the name would have been at the time of Abdu'l-Baha, but who had been Baha'is for about 5 generations.
What was the name?
Hankins, was as I knew them, but of course that wasn't the mother's maiden name, and it was her family that had been Baha'is for 5 generations in Detroit, I believe, or that area at least. And Abdu'l-Baha visited their apartment. And this would have been the, it would have been the grandmother of the parents of my generation. So the great grandmother of my generation of children. And when the parents of my generation, when the grandmother of my generation was still very young, like a baby, I believe, actually. So Abdul Baha actually visits their apartment. It was a small apartment, and at the time, the mother had a babe, an infant child, a young boy, and just all a bunch of little kids. And the story that I was told was that she was horrified because Abdul Baha showed up at her home, and she didn't even have any proper adult glasses to give him a cup of water with. All the glasses she had were meant for children. And so he wanted a cup of water. He asked for a cup of water, so he brought her in this children's glass. And of course, Abdul Baha drank from it without acting like it was totally normal to him. And at about that moment, her son, who would have been the great uncle of the children I knew at the time, I was there, comes hurtling through the room and careens right into Abdul Baha. So the mother is again horrified. And all Abdul Baha does is he takes his prayer beads and places them on the child's head. He didn't get them back. They still have the prayer beads.
Wow.
And they brought them out for one of his anniversaries. That's how I heard this story, was that they brought them out for us to see. But it was amazing. The story of these people who had met him, and it had passed down the family like that. It would have been amazing.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yes. So the faith goes back to 1893. And so the early Baha'is were from that time on.
Mm-hmm.
It could be one of those early Baha'is. Of course, that were the ancestors of this beautiful family that you mentioned.
I really was listening. I like the stories that you talk about when he visited America. But I know he visited a lot of places and all of that. But when he went to visit Los Angeles at the gravesite of Chase, Chase is a very important person to Abdul Baha, the first Baha'i in America. He kissed the grave and he read the tablet of visitation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah,
Yes.
and he was called steadfast. So, he was very, very important to Abdul Baha.
Very important, Abdul Baha. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And of course, there were other important people too that there are stories of them here and there, including, you probably know that I may have mentioned the story, and you probably know the story of Robert Turner, the first African American who became Baha'i, who was the butler of Mrs. Hearst, who was a wealthy person in San Francisco, that area. And by the way, Abba stayed in her home too while she was in California. And of course, Louis Gregory, that Abba visited with in New York and in Washington, D.C. And of course, Louis Gregory, who through the encouragement of Abba married that white woman, Louisa Matthews from England. And so each one of them is just an amazing story that we need to focus on when we go to Washington, D.C. or San Francisco or this place and that place, and share them with you. Or Sarah Farmer, Sarah Farmer? Most of you probably know Sarah Farmer, who purchased the Greenacre.
Oh, yeah. I heard that. Yeah, I heard that story. Yes. Yeah, I heard that story.
Good. So now that I mentioned that, let me just share a couple minutes or 3-4 minutes about Sarah Farmer and the story of Greenacre that some of you know. And so Sarah Farmer was a very open-minded lady from the state of Maine, the northernmost state of USA, next to Canada. And she bought this huge farm called Greenacre, 200 acres. This is before she was Baha'i, before she became Baha'i, and said that she wants to dedicate it to open mind and open-hearted people to come and visit and to have conferences and talk about issues. I mean, at that time, she had an open mind based on the teaching of the Baha'i faith, independent search for truth without prejudice and superstition. This is what she believed. And so in 1896, she came across the word Baha'i and the Baha'i faith, and she immediately declared her faith in 1896. And then she decided to go and visit Abdu'l-Baha. And so 1898, she was among the first group of Baha'is, Sarah Farmer from there, and of course I mentioned Mrs. Hurst and the butler, Robert Turner, and many others who were the first group of Baha'is who went on pilgrimage to spend time with Abdu'l-Baha. And when she was in Haifa, in Akka and Haifa, she mentioned to Abdu'l-Baha that she has purchased this place. And at this time, she said, I want to dedicate it to Abdu'l-Baha, and it is my present to you. So she presented that place to Abdu'l-Baha, and from that time on, it became our Baha'i school and summer school. I had the pleasure of visiting Greenacre a couple of times when I was a student in New York. Any one of you have visited Greenacre? You must. It's a beautiful place. And of course, the place that Abdu'l-Baha spent time and Sarah Farmer and all that. So we have so many of these stories for the stories of Abdu'l-Baha's visit. Anyone else like to share something?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
There is any book about Tortonche's life, and I would like to know when he became a Baha'i and how he became a Baha'i.
There's probably, I think some of the friends may know, I have not seen a book about him, but there probably is, or long passages. But as I mentioned, in this book, there's this long passage about him and his declaration. And his declaration, from what I understand, he was the first Baha'i, and the Baha'i faith began in 1893, so he should have declared in 1893. But the detail of his declaration, at this time, I don't recall. But you probably know that the first teacher of the Baha'i faith in the US was who? Anyone remembers?
Abul Fazail.
The first teacher of the Baha'i, that first came in 1901, but the faith started 8-9 years before that. So Ibrahim Khairullah was Syrian. He was actually from Syria, was the first teacher of the faith, and through him, and I'm sure Tortonches also came through him, because before his coming to US, there was not a Baha'i, nobody had even heard of the word Baha'i. And Dr. Ibrahim Khairullah was the first teacher, and he also taught yoga and those kind of things. And through his classes and through his explanations, a large number of people, probably close to 300-400 people in the course of 4 or 5 years, 6-7 years, became Baha'is. But this is where every one of us are cautioned to be cautious, so that we know that that's the word of God and I'm nothing. If we are talking, we are just a vehicle to explain the word of God and nothing else. But he became proud. He wrote to Abdu'l-Baha that Abdu'l-Baha was still a prisoner, of course. And at that time, he wrote to Abdu'l-Baha, you take care of the East and I'll take care of the West. I'll be in charge of whole North America. He had the guts to say these things to the center of the covenant, and that I'll be in charge of the West. Of course, that was the beginning of his downfall, in spite of all of his accomplishments.
It's remarkable if you ever look at, his, because Lua Getzinger corresponds with Abdu'l-Baha about this problem. And because he turned against the Getzingers because I suppose he recognized their loyalty to Abdu'l-Baha. But and Abdu'l-Baha basically told them to keep being kind to him, to show every kindness they could to him. And they did. And it's amazing to read the letters that she writes, and to see how, even though he's actually attacking her at the time. And yet
Yes.
she is still, just like Abdul Baha would have, showing kindness and speaking well of him. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's the message of the faith. Just be kind even to the enemy. But of course, it came a point in time that too much was too much. And even Abdul Baha, the son of the covenant, instructed that absolutely no contact with covenant breakers. Leave them to themselves and pray for them, but don't even contact them. Don't even write to them. Don't even read anything they may say or write, and so on. So that everything has a reason. Any other thoughts that friends like to share?
I just wanted to know the name. It was Abraham, the first teacher that came to America. Abraham what?
Khairullah, Abraham Khairullah. Khairullah, K-H-E-I R-O-L-L-A-H.
Hirullah.
Yeah, Abraham Khairullah.
Just a quick question, like who are the people to be considered as our enemies? Just those people who are covenant breakers, or?
Well, even they, we don't consider them as enemy, we consider them as misguided. And
So who are the people who we consider enemies then?
well, people, my reading of Abdu'l-Baha is that we have no enemy and everyone is our friends. When even Baha'u'llah writes to the major killer of the major main martyrs of the faith, and he calls them serpent and wolf and the son of the wolf. But even in epistle to the son of the wolf that he writes, he was one of these major mullahs and killers of the martyrs of our faith. He tells them that even if he repents, in spite of all the bad things that he had done, God would forgive. So when he writes this beautiful long epistle to him, I mean, this is not the ultimate. He says, even you would be forgiven, even the person who has done the worst, according to our writings, until the last minute of their lives. But then at the last minute, he truly, with an open mind and open heart, asks forgiveness from God. God forgives. So this is our perception for humanity. Everyone is our friend. We have no enemy. Those enemies have created themselves as enemies, but we are their friends and we do our best to reach them. And the covenant breakers, we stay away from them until they repent.
And it's like also that wonderful passage in the Quran where he says, basically at the moment of death, how many a sinner has seen the light of God and been saved. Exactly. And we look at the moment of death, actually, and how he warns us that how many of a true believer has fallen as at that time as well,
Yeah.
It's
amazing.
Friends.
Elaine was started talking to us.
Yeah. Thanks for your talk, your presentation, as usual. Excellent. It's amazing, despite what Abdu'l-Baha suffered when he was in prison, and what he suffered from his family, his relatives, that prevented him from being at the shrine of Baha'u'llah. At one point, he was denied from going there. And also when he started travel, it's amazing the amount of love that Abdu'l-Baha showered on everybody, despite his suffering and the treatment that he got, he never wavered. And he never wavered. And despite his failing health, he was able to accomplish so much because of his total reliance on the power of the Blessed Beauty.
And
his total reliance.
And as was mentioned in what was read, is that I think it was that even though Abdu'l-Baha was not a prophet, but he's probably the closest to it. And we know his life is just a magic. the fact that he was
Yes.
born on the day that the Baha'i faith began, May 23rd, 1844, the day that the Bab declared himself. And the fact that we consider his life, that is May 23rd, 1844, to his ascension, that is November 28th, 1921, as what? As the prophetic cycle of the Baha'i faith. That is the prophetic cycle. That's when God, Prophet, and his special apostle Al-Baha was on this earth to consolidate this faith and to consolidate this faith to move us toward the golden age of the Baha'i era, which is the absolute oneness of humanity and oneness of religion.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
The victory of God.
Yes, mystery of God.
Well, friends, I'm afraid I'm going to wrap up this lovely discussion because we're reading to the end of our allotted time. But before I do, we have a few quick announcements. The program today has been recorded and it will be posted on the YouTube channel entitled South DeKalb Baha'i Unity Center, where you can view it and invite others to view it as well. For members of the Baha'i Faith, you are warmly encouraged to make a financial contribution to the South DeKalb Baha'i Fund, the Sandy Springs Baha'i Fund, and the National Baha'i Fund through the online contribution system at ocs.baha'i.us, or mail a check to the Baha'i Unity Center at 2370 Wesley Chapel Road, Decatur, Georgia, 30035. I want to give many thanks to everyone who worked together to make today's program possible. Our wonderful speaker, our volunteer readers, Barbara Hennix, without whom we wouldn't be able to keep going, the spiritual assemblies of the Baha'i of South DeKalb and Sandy Springs, and of course, a thanks to everyone who's here who made this an actual event. So I'm Stephen Boynton. Until next time, stay safe and well. We're going to end now with a closing prayer for the departed.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Roger.
Is there anyone who would care to read the closing prayer? If not, I have one ready.
I can do it.
All right.
Okay. Oh my God, O thou forgiver of sins, bestower of gifts, dispeller of afflictions, verily I beseech thee to forgive the sins of such as have abandoned the physical garment and have ascended to the spiritual world, O my Lord. Purify them from trespasses, dispel their sorrows, and change their darkness into light. Cause them to enter into the garden of happiness, cleanse them with the most pure water, and grant them to behold thy splendors on the loftiest mount. Abdul Baha.
Alawapa. Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you.
Alaupa, thank you, everybody.
Allahu Akbar.
Thank you.